Did Greek and Roman students walk to school, or they dropped off by their parents, driving the latest fashionable wagon or cart? Was there such a thing as recess? If so, what did the kids play? Jump rope? Hop, skip, and jump? Foursquare? If not, what kept their teachers from going simply mad? Is it true that gym classes were all in the nude? And I had trouble. Oh, don't even get me started on that. These and other questions will be answered right after this. I'm Professor Jerome Arkenberg, and I've been teaching a wide variety of history courses at colleges across this country for the past 30 years. In this video, I'm going to tell you about, first, where and when formal education began in both Greece and Rome. Secondly, who could teach, or I should say, who taught, and who could be taught in both Greece and Rome. And finally, what was taught and how it was taught. At the end, I'll have the wrap-up quote on this video. But first, make sure to click like, share, especially subscribe, and that little bell thingy, so I can continue to bring you more great videos just like this one. Now, in the 8th century BC, as plow farming replaced horticulture in Greece, and villages turned into first towns, then cities, and, key part, as Phoenician merchants and settlers arrived, bringing with them the art of writing, as I just mentioned, appeared, and with it, a way to teach it, by way of schools run by teachers paid directly by parents, each teacher offering different kinds of knowledge based on their own expertise, which meant there was no standard curriculum, but one nonetheless heavily based on the tales and myths of the Greeks and neighboring peoples. Also, primarily throughout, there was no one dedicated school building other than the Gymnasion and Palaistra for the athletic bits. No one dedicated school building that existed. Classes were held pretty much wherever teachers wanted to. It could be down in the agora, which would have been really noisy. Could be outside the city limits, which is where Plato taught, up in the Academos Grove. Could be up on the citadel. Could be on the steps of a temple. Anyway. A typical student, a boy, almost normally in some areas, especially Athens, only boys were allowed to go to these schools. There's no law saying that girls could not go to school. It was just simply the local custom. Anyway, as I said, the boy, as you see here, the Greeks have invented the laptop. Anyway, the boy normally attended 3 different schools. As I said, not an actual building, schools, or perhaps one should say studied under 3 different types of teacher. The first, the Grammatistes, who taught reading, writing, composition, and arithmetic via oral drill and memorization. Students learning to write or taking notes on wax tablets, using pebbles or an abacus to do arithmetic, and subject to strict, often harsh discipline, including beatings and floggings by the teacher, totally approved by the parents. Secondly, the Kitharistes, who taught music and poetry. And boys had to learn these by heart, via, again, oral drill, and floggings to encourage them, as a good chunk of Greek lore and history, along with behavioral precepts and moral examples, were contained in poetry, such as the Iliad and the Odyssey, and many others, which today are lost to us or exist only in fragments. Thirdly, the Paidotribes, who taught boys, only boys, athletics and choral line dancing. Yes, it sounds weird, but being able to move together as a unit in unison was a key requirement for fighting in the military formation known as the phalanx, as discussed by me elsewhere. Most athletic practice and this choral line dancing was done at a Gymnasion. Yes, we would say the gymnasium, but it would have been pronounced Gymnasion, literally the naked place. Gymnos is the Greek word for naked. Gymnasion, the naked place, as all exercise was done in the nude, as you can see in these pictures here. However, wrestling had its own school and practice ground, for some reason, known as the Palaistra. Now, as I said, women primarily, especially in Athens and a few others, were not allowed to go to any of these schools. Some areas, however, it was allowed. There were schools, or I should say, the girls could study with the different teachers, though they're not going to the Gymnasion primarily, except perhaps in Sparta, to learn various things other than household economics. Hypatia of Alexandria in Egypt, for example, was a famed and beloved teacher of philosophy before she was gang-raped and killed by Christian monks for daring to teach men and boys. Not exactly one of the highlights of Christianity. Now, once the boy, a student, primarily the boy, had finished up with all those three teachers, the next stage of learning was to attend the Symposion. This was not just a place for men to debate the day's issues and ideas, as you get with Socrates' dialogues, to debate the day's issues and ideas and be entertained simultaneously, but where young men were introduced to adult concerns, thus functioning essentially as a kind of high school for teenage boys. And I look at these and many other pictures and thinking, I don't remember high school being anything at all like this. I'm not sure that was a good thing or a bad thing, but nonetheless. Symposia were usually held in the men's quarters of the household, so a private house, where 14 to 27 symposiasts, men and some of the youth, would recline on 7 to 9 pillowed couches arrayed against the three walls of the room away from the door, though the young men attending did not recline but sat, and all ate and drank, listened to poetry and music, and consorted with slaves and prostitutes whilst engaged in intellectual discourse. Now, higher education per se began in Greece around 450 BC with the appearance of the Sophists. These were professional educators who invented the lecture. Oh, damn them. Anyway, the Sophists geared towards practical knowledge for good citizenship in the assembly. And they would teach subjects such as dialectic, the art of logical argument, and rhetoric, the art of persuasive speaking. Now, in Rome, unlike Greece, Roman children, both boys and girls, yes, girls were allowed. Of course, there was a difference. Sometimes boys or girls or both would simply be taught by a tutor. This was primarily if your parents were wealthy, they could hire a tutor or buy one. A number of tutors were slaves. Anyway, boys and girls were taught by a Litteratus, or instructor. As you can sort of see here, this would have been a Litteratus, who often set up his own ludus literarius, or primary school. There were no licensing requirements. And this would meet anywhere they could. Example, in one of the baths, a temple, on the steps of a temple, the teacher's home, maybe a wealthy parent's home instead, a portico, a basilica, wherever. Both methods and subject were heavily influenced by Greek practice. The Romans admired most, if not all, of Greek culture, though oddly enough, they tended to regard individual Greeks as disgusting, weird. Anyway, method and subject heavily influenced by Greek practice, so strict discipline, that's the flogging and the beatings, oral drill, and memorization. And here the students would learn reading, writing, grammar, arithmetic, composition, poetry, and literature. However, the Romans did not teach music or athletics as fields of study. Students aged 6 to 12, get the ages right, attended these schools every day, except feast or market days. Remember, there is no such thing as a weekend in the ancient world. So it's every day unless it was a feast day or a market day. And they began by learning to read and write on wax tablets, as discussed elsewhere. Also, arithmetic on an abacus. And as they moved on, they had to memorize text, tested on them by the literaris via oral drills at the end of the week. Though there was no kind of formal test to conclude a unit or move on. Essentially, whenever the teacher thought you were good enough, then you could move on. And in fact, this is the method used down throughout the European Middle Ages, really up to the 20th century, to teach young students, boys, usually girls too. And of course, there would have been beatings and floggings quite acceptable to motivate, quote unquote, lazy or misbehaving students. From 9 to 12 years old, depending on how fast they advanced, boys, largely the boys from wealthy families, because those who were not from wealthy families usually began apprenticeship training, while girls learned homemaking skills. Anyway, as I said, boys from wealthy families would normally begin study with a Grammaticus at his ludus, that's the school, or they would learn more advanced skills in reading, writing, speaking, poetry, and Greek. Greek, if they didn't yet know it. Then tested via oral drill to move on until the Grammaticus was satisfied with their work. Floggings and beatings remain common. At age 14 or 15, a few boys, primarily those of the upper classes, primarily but not exclusively, primarily, those of the upper classes who intended to go into politics or law, would then move on to be taught by a Rhetor, who taught not just public speaking, but also geography, music, philosophy, literature, religion, and geometry, all of which might come up at some point in a debate or a legal speech. However, floggings and beatings remained a key motivational tool, if you will. For advanced knowledge, students could be sent to study with a local Greek philosopher, many of whom came to Rome, willingly or not, a number of them were slaves, when Rome began to conquer the Greek East in the 2nd century BC. And for yet higher learning, a boy, usually of a wealthy family, might be sent to attend one of the universities in Athens, Tarsus, Alexandria, or Rhodes. The wrap-up quote. I didn't learn geometry and literary criticism and useless nonsense like that. I learned how to read the letters on public inscriptions. I learned how to divide things into hundreds and work out percentages. And I know weights, measures, and currency. Petronius. Let me know what you think of this quote in the comments section below. Also, what you liked about this video, and what other historical topics or subjects you'd like to see in future videos. Be sure to click like, share, especially subscribe, as it will help me bring you more great videos, and that little bell thingy, so you'll know when the next History Waits for No One video is posted. If you want to know more, there are recommended studies on this topic in the description below, along with other ways to connect with me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the past.